Hi, I'm Tia. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share with you all of the books that I read during the month of January. In January, I was able to read 15 different things, and I really had a great reading month. The quality of the things that I read in January were excellent, and I really enjoyed almost everything that I read. I think that I didn't give anything below 3 stars, so that means it was a pretty great reading month. So I'm just going to share with you the things that I read in the order that I read them, and let's just get started. The first thing I read this month was The Haunting of Maddie Clare by Simone St. James. This was a book that I did as a buddy read with Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly and Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand. And this is a book by an author that the three of us all have really enjoyed in the past. So we decided that we wanted to read this together. We all owned this book. And I'm sure that you've probably heard of Simone St. James. She is the author of The Broken Girls and The Sundown Motel. So she generally writes mysteries that have a touch of the paranormal aspect. And the Sundown Motel and The Broken Girls both have a dual timeline aspect. This one, however, does not have a dual timeline aspect, but it was still really, really interesting, and it definitely is still a mystery with a touch of the paranormal. This one takes place in 1920s England, and it's following Sarah, who is on a job interview. She meets this young man named Alistair, who is actually an author. He writes books about ghosts, and what he does is go out and he investigates these stories of ghosts that he has heard, or maybe someone might hire him to rid them of a ghost, that type of thing. And so he needs someone to come in and sort of be his secretary and help him out on his adventures, I guess you would call them, while his normal assistant is out of town. So Sarah goes and meets him at the interview, and she gets the job, and they set out on this most recent job that he has come across, and it has to do with a ghost whose name is Maddie. So they go to where the haunting is taking place, and everything just takes off from there. There was a lot of really creepy elements to this one. I was literally like incredibly scared and like telling my husband like, nope, what just happened? Nope, there's no way you can get me to do that. I don't understand. The answer is no, I would not be doing what she is agreeing to do. This one also has a bit of a romance, more romance I think than I've seen in the previous Simone St. James books that I have read, but I think that the romance element might be more common in some of her older published works. But yeah, so this one definitely has a strong romance element, and that was the part that I felt was the weakest part in here. I think the three of us kind of agreed that the romance sort of felt like it came out of nowhere and was a little bit forced. I liked all of the characters, and I didn't necessarily mind that they ended up together. It just, there was elements of it that were not enjoyable. There was like a sexual encounter that felt a bit rough and abrasive, and I mean, I don't know. I don't want to ruin anything, but yeah. I did end up giving this 4 stars. I think it was a well-written story. Simone St. James has wonderful writing. The creepy elements were just perfect, and I enjoyed all of the characters. And if the romance part had been a little bit better, I probably would have given it a 5 star. After that, I picked up The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. So that is part of the Chronicles of Narnia series, and I actually have this big bind up of all of the stories, and in this particular one, The Magician's Nephew is published in here first. I know that there is some disagreement on what order you should actually read the Chronicles of Narnia, because I think that The Magician's Nephew was actually published after The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I just went with the way that they are put in this bind up. Anyway, Magician's Nephew is sort of a prequel to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This book deals with the birth of Narnia and tells about how the wardrobe came into existence. It was really a beautiful book. It was very short, but I thought that it dealt with some really intense topics when you like really step back and thought about it, even though it's supposed to be a children's book. It's told in like a very fairy tale-ish manner, but it sort of reminded me of C.S. Lewis's other book, the Space Trilogy. Now, I only read the first 2 in that, Perilandia and Out of the Silent Planet, I believe is the name of those 2. Yes. And I felt like they were sort of similar. I mean, obviously that one is more for adults, but both of these books, those two and this one, they deal with, you know, the concept of there being other planets, other universes that have life on them, the birth of a new planet, sort of the origin of sin, which is a whole lot to cram into such a small book. And I mean, I don't know if children would actually catch on to those things. That would be something that you would have to talk to them about if it's something that you're interested in exploring more. But yeah, it was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to continuing on with this series. My older daughter did read that with me, and I think that she'd enjoyed it, probably not as much as I did. But hopefully giving her a taste of it this early on, maybe she will come to love these stories even more in her adulthood. I picked up A is for Alibi by Sue Grafton. So this is the first in the Kinsey Malone series, and I did buddy read this with my friend Serena, who I've met through YouTube. I don't think she has her own channel, but she does have an Instagram. And we just had a whole lot of fun reading this together. I mean, at least I did. I think that she did too, but I just really enjoyed this first book. This is a series that I've been wanting to start for a while, mostly because it is set in a fictional Santa Barbara, which I live very close to Santa Barbara, and so I was just really interested in reading a book that was set in Santa Barbara. This follows a detective whose name is Kinsey, and she is like a private investigator. In this book, someone has hired her to investigate the murder of her husband. This particular woman was actually put in jail for the murder, and she has gotten out, and now she wants to know who is actually the person who is responsible for the murder. I thought that this was a really well plotted mystery. I really enjoyed all the intricacies and twists and turns, and how all of the different characters ended up fitting together within the mystery. And for me, though, a huge draw, I will admit, was the setting and the fact that this took place in a false, fake, made-up Santa Barbara. In the book, it's called Santa Teresa, and the setting was just so vivid to me. I just thought it was perfectly written. It's almost like it's its own character. And there was actually even a part in here where she drove through my town, which was so interesting because, I mean, I live in a pretty small-ish town in California, and you don't really hear about it. It's never really written in books. I mean, most people don't even know where it is. But anyway, so yeah, it was just really, really interesting and perfect for me in my time of life, and I'm really looking forward to continuing on in this series. I've heard that the books just get even better, and that I will end up really falling in love with Kinsey and the friend group that she builds around herself. I will say that this was written in 1983, I believe, and I don't think that it suffers from like cheesy 80s dialogue that I've found in other mysteries that are written in that time period, or even other books written in that time period. It didn't suffer from that for me at all. And I will say that Kinsey does think a lot about other people's weight. So if that is something that is off-putting to you, then you might want to steer clear of this. It wasn't offensive to me personally. I do sometimes get offended when female characters are always thinking about other female characters' weight and looks and judging them. But Kinsey's was more of like she was always thinking about everyone else's weight, like men, women, old, young, whatever. For some reason, it was something that always seemed to come up in her mind. So yeah, there's that. But otherwise, I would really recommend this if you're looking for a new mystery series and you like to read about private investigators within your mystery series. Then I would definitely recommend this one. Then I finished a graphic novel series that I actually started in December, so I was really glad to be able to check a series off of my checklist. That was pretty awesome. But that was the Descender graphic novel series. In December, I read volumes 1 and 2, and so in January I picked up 3, 4, 5, and 6. So these are, let's see, this one's called Singularities, then we have Orbital Mechanics, and then I have Rise of the Robots, and then finally the last one was The Machine War. So I definitely recommend these if you are into sci-fi, particularly sci-fi graphic novels. I think that these were really well written, and I really enjoyed reading about this futuristic society. This graphic novel series is really about robots and androids and cyborgs and all that type of thing, and how they interact with the human race. And this one really features heavily on this young robot named, I don't know why I say young. He looks like a young child. His name is Tim. I think it was Tim 21, and then you also meet Tim 22. And Tim 21 was just so sweet. I fell in love with him. There's another robot who's like a dog robot, and I fell in love with him too. And this big driller robot who was really lovable. I don't know. I just loved all the robots. Not all of them. Some of them were not really good guys, but yeah, it was just really interesting, fascinating. I will say that I think I enjoyed volumes 1 through 4 more than I enjoyed volumes 5 and 6. The ending was still good. They were definitely still 4-star reads, but the beginning of the series was more of a 5-star read for me. And yeah, I would definitely recommend these if you are into graphic novels and you are looking for a new one to pick up. This is only a 6-volume series, so it's not a very big commitment. And these, I didn't say, are written by Jeff Lemire and illustrated by Dustin Nguyen. So yeah. Next, I finished Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. So this is a book that I actually buddy read with Tara over from Buzzwords Books. And I'm so glad that we ended up doing this together, because I think that having a buddy to read a nonfiction book gives me more of a push to pick it up every single day. I do find I enjoy nonfiction, but it is a little bit harder to get through than fiction is, obviously. Yeah, so this is actually one that was on my shelf tour at the beginning of January. It's one of the ones, I'm not sure if it got the most votes, but it was in the top 3, so I decided to go ahead and pick this one up. And I'm so glad that I actually finally read this book. I know that it's been around BookTube for a couple of years now, and it's been made into a movie, but this follows a lawyer named Brian Stevenson, and he sort of alternates chapters. He goes back and forth between, one chapter will be about a specific case with his client named Walter McMillan, who has been put on death row for a crime that he didn't actually commit. And then the other chapter, like then the chapter after that, will be about, I don't know, a different topic that will focus on a whole bunch of different cases within this one topic, if that makes sense. And then the next chapter will go back to Walter, and then it just sort of switches back and forth. And to me, that was the most confusing thing about this book, was the way that it switched back and forth between topics. It kind of made it hard to figure out exactly where he was going at first. It took a while to sink into the structure of the way that the book was laid out, if that makes any sense at all. And even within some of the chapters, he would jump back, like within the actual chapter, he would jump back and forth a lot between topics, which sort of made it a little bit confusing. But I think that this look into the U.S. justice system and the way that underprivileged people and people of color are treated within the United States justice system was such an important topic. And I'm so glad that I read all of this and learned all of this information. I think it's something that everyone should definitely pick up. But like I said, do know that it is a little bit confusing the way that it's laid out. I think that the information was like 5-6-star information, but the format was probably more of like a 3-star. Yeah, but still wonderful read. I'm so glad that I read it. And thank you to everyone who recommended for me to pick this up in January. Another book that was recommended to me off of my TBR shelf in January was Wonderscape by Jennifer Bell. So this is a middle grade fantasy sci-fi book, and I actually buddy read this with my oldest daughter as well. This one follows 3 young children named Arthur, Ren, and Cecily, and they go to investigate an explosion in their neighborhood, and they end up finding themselves trapped in the Wonderscape in the year 2473. The Wonderscape is actually like this epic more than virtual reality game. They call it in reality adventure game, and it has a whole bunch of famous characters in the game, and there's different worlds or areas that you can go to. It's kind of complicated, but they end up being trapped here by this weird glitchy mistake. I don't really know how to explain it to you without ruining the story, and so they have to find a way out of here, out of the Wonderscape, and along the way they meet a whole bunch of different people, and they end up having to rescue some people as well. So, and they ended up forming like a pretty good friendship too. I think that was one of the best aspects of the book, was the friendship that they ended up growing throughout the course of the story. And I also really enjoyed seeing a bunch of different historical characters. That was a lot of fun too. Unfortunately, overall, when I look at this book as a whole, I found it to be a little bit forgettable. I think that the concept was incredibly imaginative, but the execution was just a little bit boring. I would say that my daughter liked it a little bit more than I did, but she still wasn't like particularly wild about this story. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth checking out if it sounds like something that you might be interested in, but it just wasn't like blow your socks off or anything. Then I finished As Bright as Heaven by Susan Messner. So this is a book that I actually did a group read with a whole bunch of friends over on Instagram in the group chat, and I just had so much fun reading this book with all of those people. Everyone who did this read with me, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for all of the discussion that you did during that week. You really made the reading of this book so much fun, and so much more than it would have been if I had just been reading it by myself. So this is a historical fiction book that takes place in Pennsylvania, and it follows the Bright family who has decided to move from the country in Pennsylvania into the city of Philadelphia so that the dad can start to take over his uncle's business. And did I say it takes place in 1918? Anyway, it takes place in 1918, and during the book, I'm sure what you've probably heard is that the Spanish flu breaks out during this time period, and this family has to deal with that. The book is told from 4 different perspectives. The mother and her 3 daughters alternate telling the story, which I found to be incredibly interesting. I love seeing all of their daughters' perspectives as well as the mother. I ended up falling in love with all of them. Now, granted, the youngest one was not my favorite, but I still enjoyed seeing her perspective of everything that was happening to their family. The girls are rather young at the beginning when they first started out telling their stories. Willa, I think, was like 6 or 7. I mean, she was pretty young, and I will say that that was off-putting to some people in our discussion group. So if that's something that you don't really enjoy reading about, you know, perspectives from young children, that might be something to consider before going into this book. I loved this book. It kept me turning the pages. I was enthralled with everything that happened. Now, the daughters did make some poor decisions that I was not 100% okay with. They weren't decisions that I would have personally made, but it didn't make or break the story for me, if that makes sense. Like, I love the writing and the storytelling and the plot, just everything about it was so wonderful that the fact that the daughters made some bad decisions didn't ruin the story for me. Like, I'm okay with bad decisions in books. I don't know. I don't know how to explain that really, but before we read this, I had never heard anyone say anything bad about this book, so that was a really interesting part of our discussion group, that we did have people. There was a person who DNF'd it, there was a person who gave it 2 stars, I think there was a couple of 3-star ratings, and you know, there were some people who just really didn't like this book, so it was just so interesting to have all of those different perspectives, to see why and what didn't work for each one of the people. Yeah. So this was just a great reading experience. If you haven't read it already, I can't promise that you're going to love it, obviously, because, you know, I've seen and heard other people say that there are aspects of this that really, really bothered them. Some of the daughters' decisions in here just really, really bugged people, and, you know, it was something they couldn't get past, which I totally understand. If you're not enjoying the characters, then, you know, it's really hard to continue on in the book. But I loved it, and I would recommend it. I think that this was my favorite book that I read this month. I ended up giving it 5 stars, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. Then I finished Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This is another book that was recommended off of my shelves by you guys during my January TBR video. And I was super excited to read this. I have heard a couple of bad reviews about this book, so, but I was expecting to love it. And at the beginning, I totally did love it. Like, I was loving the story. Christina Lauren's writing is the type of writing that you can just gobble up like potato chips. It's so easy to digest. And this one I would classify as a women's fiction. There's actually an author's note at the end that says this is our first women's fiction novel. It follows this woman named Macy Sorensen. So it's basically her story told in alternating timelines. Like she starts from when she's 12 and then switches back to the present day. She goes back and forth telling this story. It's basically telling the story of her and her next door neighbor. He's actually like, her dad has this lake house that they go to on the weekends in the summer, and so this neighbor of hers that she meets at this lake house, his name is, what is his name? His name is Elliot. And yeah, so she meets Elliot when they first move into the lake house, and they become very, very best friends. And you know from the beginning that obviously something has happened between the two of them that has kept them from speaking for quite a number of years. And so she is telling us the story of what happened between the two of them in alternating chapters, like I said. So yeah, it was really intriguing, and I was so invested in their story for a very long time, keeping in the back of my mind that obviously something had to have happened between the two of them to make her not talk to him for so long, which I was a little bit leery of that. But so up until that point when we finally find out what happened, I was totally on board with this, and I was thinking it was, you know, at least a 4-star read. But then when she reveals everything that happened, you know, that made her not talk to him for that long time, I just was not on board with it at all. I'm sorry, you guys. I know that so many of you love this book, but I just was not okay with the ending at all. And I don't want to give spoilers and tell you what it is that bugged me. If you want to message me and talk about it, I certainly can do that with you. But yeah, the ending brought the book down to like a 3.5 star for me. It didn't erase the fact that, you know, it was really well written and I enjoyed the characters up to that part. It just, yeah, I couldn't keep it at a 4 after getting to the ending. So yeah. And next I read Goodnight Beautiful by Amy Malloy. So this is, as you can see, one of my Book of the Month Club books. I think I got this in December, and this one is a mystery thriller book. The book is about Sam and Annie, who are newlyweds who have just moved from New York back to Sam's hometown, and he has opened up a business there where he is a therapist, and the blurb says, unbeknownst to him, you can hear every word that is happening on his therapy sessions from the room up above, like through the vent. And so that's like basically all that I knew going into the story. And I don't want to tell you anything else than that, but this book just had some amazing twists. You know, all thrillers have twists, and some you see coming and some you don't. But this one just had like those sit-up moments of like, what? Excuse me, what just happened? I think I need to go back and read this from the beginning. Yeah, it was just that type of thing. I just really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was so well written and so well thought out to make the reader end up thinking that and feeling that way. It's not a perfect book by any means, but it's one of my favorite thrillers that I've read in the last couple of years. I didn't think that it was over the top with like gratuitous bits, like horrible sex scenes or horrible, you know, like gross out bits. I mean, there are some of that in there, but it wasn't over the top. Like, I've just read some thrillers where I just thought, what is this? Are you just putting everything in here for like sensationalism in some thrillers? But this one just wasn't that way. It was just so well written to me, and I highly, highly recommend this if it sounds interesting to you at all. I would love to know what you thought about it if you do decide to pick it up. Next, I finished Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. So this is a reread for me, but this time around I buddy read it with my oldest daughter. This edition is huge. I mean, it was 777 pages. It took us like 2 weeks to read this. But yeah, I love this book so much, and I'm sure that you know that this is the story of the March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy. And I will say that this is the first time that I've ever read this book and I haven't hated Amy. I normally can't stand Amy, and I think that it might be the movie that makes me like really dislike her, because after we read this, we went and watched the like 1994 version, and oh man, I really don't like Amy in that movie. I want to watch the new movie, but we started watching it and we saw that it was like it switched back and forth between timelines, and it wasn't very clear like which timeline it was in. So yeah, I'll try it again some other time. But this book is in 2 parts. The first part when they are much younger, and then the second part takes place like 4 years later. And I will say that the first part is definitely my favorite part. It's so easy to read, and the characters are so wonderful, and the life lessons that Marmee instills in her girls are just lovely to read about. The sister relationships are great, even though they fight a lot too. The second part was a lot slower and harder to get through, harder to digest. I think it probably could have been cut down a little bit. I know that's terrible to say. I think that the first half definitely deserves a 5 or a 6 star, and the second half is probably more of like a 3.5 and 4. But overall, I can't give it less than a 5 stars because the first half is so wonderful, and the ending, the very ending, is so wonderful. The book it deserves a 5 star. Yeah. I'm glad I reread this, and I'm glad that my daughter was able to read it along with me. It's just a classic, wonderful story. Okay, then I did another group read of The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain. This again was with a whole bunch of different people over on Instagram. Thank you to everyone who joined me for this one. Again, I had so much fun reading this with all of you. You were amazing at keeping the discussion going. This one is a little bit harder to explain. I don't know if I should categorize this as women's fiction or sci-fi or historical fiction or just a mix-up of all 3. I will say, going into this book, the only thing I knew was that it had time travel in it. So I feel okay telling you that the whole premise of this book is that Carly is pregnant in 1970, and she finds out that her unborn baby has a heart defect. And so a particular person in her life comes to her and says, I know a way that you can go into the future and take care of your baby's heart defect. So she does some time traveling, and it was a whole lot of mind-bendy stuff going on, a lot of like heavy topics, heart-wrenching moments. It was a lovely story. I really enjoyed the time travel aspects. I enjoyed trying to figure all of that out and think about how would that work and what would I do in that situation. And it was so much fun. And yeah, it was heartbreaking and moving and touching and everything that you could possibly hope for in a book. I think that the writing was incredible. I think that she did an amazing job plotting out this book. I had a particular way that I wanted the story to end. It didn't end up happening for me, but I can totally see that the ending that she gave it is better than the one that I wanted. You know, it worked better. And so yeah, I can't fault her for that, I suppose. I will say that this one also had mixed reviews in our group. There were some people who loved it and some people who were more mediocre about it, which was surprising again, because I think that I had never heard anything bad about this book until doing it with the group. So that was just incredibly interesting as well. Yeah, I definitely recommend this book. It was so much fun, and I am looking forward to reading more by Diane Chamberlain as well. The final book that I read during the month of January was Gentleman Jim by Mimi Matthews. This is a book that I had from NetGalley, and it has already come out. If something that you are interested in, you can definitely pick it up now. But this is a historical romance. It was set in the early 1800s in England, and this one is a romance book that doesn't have any sex in it. They do kiss and hold hands and touch and that type of thing, but it doesn't have any sex scenes. If it's something that concerns you one way or the other. I know some people don't like to read romance that doesn't have sex, and some people don't like to read romance that does have sex. So just to let you know up front, I'm just going to tell you what happens at the beginning of this book and leave it at that and not ruin anything else for you. So at the beginning of this book, you meet Maggie and Nicholas, who are very best friends. They are about 16 years old. Maggie is the daughter of, a landed gentleman, and Nicholas is the son of a servant who works for Maggie's father, and Nicholas is like a stable boy. He lives in the stable and takes care of the horses and stuff. So they are not supposed to be together, but they have been best friends for as long as they can remember, and they are basically like in love, you know, like they say that they're everything to each other. But Nicholas ends up getting pulled away from Maggie because the neighboring guy likes Maggie and wants to marry her and knows that Nicholas likes her, and so he has accused Nicholas of this crime that he didn't commit, and so Nicholas basically runs away to avoid being hung for something that he didn't do. And then you flash forward like 10 years later. So that's all I'm going to tell you about the story. It's pitched as like a revenge story, and it's supposed to have like a lot of action and that type of thing. Action, romance, revenge. And I will say that this was probably my least favorite Mimi Matthews book that I have read so far, which is so disappointing. I think that this one was too long for what it was. The plot became very repetitive, and it was just sort of back and forth over the same issues. And yeah, I just think that she could have cut out a whole bunch of pages. I think that the characters didn't have as much chemistry and warmth to them as I have come to expect from Mimi Matthews' characters. However, I don't think that this is a terrible book. I would still recommend it. It may be something that you enjoy more than I do, because I do still think that it was wonderfully written. Mimi Matthews' writing is so wonderful that it can like cover a whole bunch of other things that I'm not enjoying, that I still was able to give this like a 3.5 star rating, because I mean she's just a wonderful writer. I just think that this book in particular was missing something, some little spark that I'm used to seeing in her books. I feel like in her other books I'm used to more like sexual tension between the characters, you know, of like this will they, won't they end up together chemistry between them, and this one I just didn't feel it between the two characters, which is disappointing when you're reading a romance book, honestly. So yeah, I sort of ended the month on a little bit of a disappointment, but definitely not a bad book at all. I would still recommend checking out Mimi Matthews. I personally would try either A Holiday by Gaslight by her, The Lost Letter, or Fair as a Star. Those three have been my favorites. And yeah, this one, Gentleman Jim, is still good. It's just not one of my top recommended of her books. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read during the month of January. I would love to know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. Did you agree with me or disagree? You know, we all have different opinions about books, and that is perfectly okay. I have learned that so much this month with the buddy reads that I did, and I want to hear what you think about them. Let me know if you want to read any of these if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're all doing well, and I will see you next time.